check out some brand new Mandela Effects. It's been a while, so buckle up. Today's list is packed with some of the craziest ones yet. And if you didn't already know, the Mandela Effect is when a large group of people clearly remember something one way, only to find out it's different now. So like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, it doesn't cost you anything, and let's get right into it. Let's talk avocados. Specifically, what is the correct spelling for these kinds of avocados? Is it H-A-S-S or is it H-A-A-S? Haas Avocados, as it's correctly pronounced, is actually spelled H-A-S-S. Is that what you remember? Because if you got this one wrong, you aren't alone. Let's look into it. Apparently this berry, and yes, an avocado is a berry, was named after its creator Rudolf Haas back in 1926 and was patented in 1935. It was such a success that today, 85% of all avocados grown in the US are Haas avocados. So where did this naming discrepancy come from? That's the real mystery here, right? Because even today, you can still find it spelled as H-A-A-S, even though that's incorrect. For example, here's a bag of frozen avocados. Look at the name. That is the now incorrect version. Huh? Or this digital checkout display at Walmart, showing again the wrong spelling. And that's not all. The now incorrect spelling, the spelling that has apparently always been wrong, has been used for decades and decades in newspaper promotions. In fact, if you search up the two different versions of the spelling on newspaper.com, the incorrect version, H-A-A-S, comes up with 14,000 results, and the now correct version, H-A-S-S, gives us 53,000 results, meaning that's a lot of typos from a lot of different people for a really long time. Almost enough to make you think it changed or something. The TV show Power Rangers debuted in 1993 and became a cultural phenomenon. Toys, clothing, posters, and even pogs. If you were there, you'd know what I'm talking about. They used to literally sell us pieces of paper cut out into circles, and we'd throw them on the ground. The 90s were a simpler time. Anyway, Power Rangers was everywhere and remained relevant throughout the 90s and into the 2000s. So more than likely you've at least heard of Power Rangers. So originally there were 5 Rangers, red, blue, black, pink, and yellow, and eventually green joining them. I say all this because there was a detail I never noticed as a child, and I only recently found out about this, and it blew my mind. Did you know the Black Ranger, played by Walter Emmanuel Jones, was missing his middle finger? And not just in real life, but also his character in the show. Did any of you know this? Have any of you ever seen this detail before? I first read about it in a comment section, and I wasn't alone in my disbelief. Dozens of people were completely blown away by this fact, so I had to know more, and sure enough, we weren't alone. How did this possibly escape the eyes of everyone who watched this? I watched Power Rangers all the time as a child, and it's amazing to me that I never noticed this detail. I owned action figures of all of them, and the reason I remember this so clearly is because they had articulating fingers, as in bendable fingers to hold their weapons. This wasn't a very common feature of toys back then, so for whatever reason, this detail stuck with me. Perhaps this is just a shocking detail that I and many others simply never noticed or picked up on. Maybe it was always that way. I'm legitimately conflicted when I look at all the details. 1. He says he lost his finger in an accident at an early age. 2. There are a bunch of photos and clips of him on the show without his middle finger. 3. There are also a bunch of photos and clips of him on the show with his middle finger. 4. All of the merch, toys, and marketing showed him with all of his fingers. And finally 5. Unlike today, TVs were much smaller back then, and the resolution on CRT televisions was much lower than it is today. So I'm left wondering what to believe. Is this another case of the Mandela Effect where history seems to have changed and now all of us are left to catch up on all the new details? Or has this always been the case? Let me hear your thoughts and your memories in the comments below. Before we get into the next brand new Mandela Effect, let's check out an interesting update to an older Mandela Effect that I've never covered before. Let's talk about the Ford logo. Many people don't remember the Ford logo having this strange curl at the end of the F. You can see it right here. But officially, it's always been there. This weird detail has been talked about and debated over for a really long time. People swear the swirl used to exist. Some will say, hey, look at this Ford key, it doesn't have a swirl. And then others will say, well, look at this Ford key, it does have a swirl. The argument goes back and forth, and they've talked about this for over a decade. Officially, and by that I mean Ford, the company, swears that the swirl has always been there, while others who remember differently have argued it hasn't. They even point to the signature of Henry Ford himself as proof that the swirl was not originally there. And hey, that's a pretty compelling argument. The Ford logo is indeed based off of Henry Ford's signature, and there isn't a swirl there. So now that you're caught up, let's check out today's update. Recently, I was doing some digging on this topic, and I found a thread talking about classic Ford wrenches. You see, back in the day, and when I say that, I mean over 100 years ago, when you bought a car, they gave you the tools to maintain it. Imagine that. Nowadays, you drown in debt for a Ford that spies on you, so it knows what targeted ads to play when you're stopped at red lights. No, I'm not joking. Ford literally holds patents on both ads that play when you stop and how it could eavesdrop on you to play targeted ads. This is the bad place. Anyway, I found images showing some of these Ford wrenches from 1917, and they indeed have the dreaded swirl. So yes, even with all the residue, counter memories, and Henry Ford's signature, the F in the Ford logo has apparently always had that little swirl. Unless the Mandela effect can also somehow change metal wrenches, or at least photos of metal wrenches, which is actually a super creepy thought. Think about it, if the Mandela effect is indeed real, and it has changed hundreds of things that we know of, how far can these changes go? We know that photos and videos can be altered, data can be deleted and written over, statues and paintings can change, historical events can be deleted and added, like in the Black Tom explosion, my favorite Mandela effect. Go watch that video right there, link in the description. Honestly, the Mandela effect is so creepy, but that's why I love talking about it. So what do you think? Do you remember the little swirl in the Ford logo? Or has it always been there? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Here's a really strange Mandela effect for you. You know how plants grow towards the sun? It's why flowers or branches grow in a certain direction. It's all about getting some of that delicious light. The actual term for that is phototropism, where stems bend towards the direction of light to maximize photosynthesis. When it comes to sunflowers, it's called heliotropism because they don't just grow towards the sun, they actively track it every single hour of the day that the sun is out. This has been a well-known and well-documented thing for a long time. So what is this sunflower Mandela effect, you might be wondering? Well, recently people started noticing that adult sunflowers no longer do this. They simply sit in place. Which is kind of weird, right? I mean, the name sunflower comes from helianthos annuus, which in Greek, helios means sun and anthos means flower.
Can you see those sunflowers? Sunflowers have a thing called heliotropism. They face the sun and curve their face towards the sun every day, all day, every hour to absorb the sun. But these sunflowers have a completely different mechanism, and for some reason, they don't like the sun.
I mean, it's literally called a sunflower. It looks like the sun and it tracks the sun. It's one of the most interesting features of the sunflower. So let's break it down. Many have said that this isn't what they remember. Others say it's always been that way, and even fewer have claimed it's because the sun was replaced a few years ago, and that the sun we have today isn't the sun we used to have, that its color is off or it's changed, which is quite the claim. A claim so massive that I'd need to see a massive amount of evidence for before I'd even start to consider that idea. Anyway, this Mandela effect started to spread, and it got really, really popular. So big, in fact, that Snopes, the website whose entire purpose is to debunk things and maintain the status quo, had to write an article about it. In that article, they claim that sunflowers have an internal alarm clock, much like us, called a circadian rhythm. While our circadian rhythm is associated with our sleep cycles, apparently sunflowers use their circadian rhythms to track the sun. The sunflower grows out on the eastern side, moves its head back towards the west as the sun moves in the sky, and at night it resets its head back towards east where the sun's going to rise again in the morning. Now the claim is that it's just juvenile sunflowers that do that, and mature sunflowers don't move. Finally, the article ends by saying that the sun hasn't been replaced and everyone is simply misremembering everything. What do you think? Call of Duty is one of the biggest franchises in the world, and one of the most popular titles in that franchise is Call of Duty Black Ops 2. I bring this up today because there's apparently a new Mandela effect going around in regards to its box art. So here's that artwork. I'm going to give you a second to look it over and see if everything looks as you might remember it. The detail that is seemingly freaking out so many people is that there is now a knife in one of his hands instead of another gun. Now, if you didn't put in hundreds of hours into this game, I can understand why it doesn't seem that shocking to you. But to many, this is an insane change. That knife was never there before. I mean, this game came out over a decade ago, so it's pretty insane that this detail is only now just being noticed. This bizarre discrepancy between memory and reality has led many to say this is a Mandela effect. I even showed it to a friend of mine that plays these games every single year, and even he said, that's not the original box art. Besides the multiple threads online of people talking about this, there's also articles being written about it, like this one. That's how big of a deal this is. Remember, these games sell tens of millions of copies. There are so many people who bought and played this game that a change to the cover like this is bound to make you scratch your head. Just think about it. You've played this game for months on end, and now something extremely familiar to you is different. And every shred of evidence proving what you remember now doesn't exist. That's why the Mandela Effect is so fascinating. It only takes one effect to affect you. And when it does, it hits hard. What do you remember? Let's talk America. If I was to ask you, what is the national bird? What would you say? If I read your mind correctly, you said it's the bald eagle, and you'd be correct. So what is the Mandela Effect here? Well, what if I told you it only recently became the national bird of the US? In fact, in December 2024, it became the national bird. December 2024, does that sound right to you? Because if not, you aren't alone. In fact, numerous articles just like this one have been written about this strange development. Let's try to make sense of this all by looking at the facts. The bald eagle has been on national emblems and even used as the Great Seal of the US on official documents since 1782, meaning it's been a symbol for the US for a long time, but it's never been the national bird of the US. In fact, it was almost hunted to extinction before legal protections were put in place in the 1940s to protect them. The bald eagle is the symbol of America. I mean, we even have official state birds for all 50 US states, but somehow the bald eagle has never been the national bird, if you can believe it. It's taken nearly 250 years to apparently get to the place we all thought we were already at, but it's official now. Is this exactly what you remember, or has something changed? Also, fun fact, founding father Benjamin Franklin actually objected to the bald eagle being chosen to represent the US, calling it a, quote, bird of bad moral character, end quote. That's so great, I had no idea.